adorable. So, you're thinking about getting a jumping spider. I genuinely find jumping spiders to be fascinating, and they give me this deep sense of purpose. But I think before you bring a jumping spider home, it's really, really important to talk about how to prepare, and that's what this video is going to be about. So a lot of problems that people run into often happen before even adopting a jumping spider. I just want to say this isn't a video to gatekeep, that's not what we're doing here. Think of it as a preparation video. So if you're in the research phase or you're just curious, keep watching. So one of the biggest problems I see is people jump straight in and they want a jumping spider, but they don't know which jumping spider. What's important to note is that there are over 6,000 species of jumping spider, and they're not all the same. And that's something that's really important to remember, that I tell customers, that I tell followers whenever they have that question. Each has distinct requirements that people need to know before dipping their toe in. So different species may have different temperature requirements, different humidity requirements. They may not be as active as other species. Lifespans are also important, especially between males and females, and even tolerance for handling. So this is one of the biggest examples that I have to give. Some beginner species are more forgivable than others. So they're more forgiving to beginners like you, if you're watching and you haven't indulged in the hobby yet. So as a breeder, I often recommend Phidippus regius species for beginners because they are that forgiving species. So they are not a species that requires bioactive setups. So I don't know if you can see, but these enclosures here are bioactive because they have a Hyllus species in them, Hyllus diardi, and they are considered to be an intermediate species. So someone who's been keeping jumping spiders a while, you can probably again dip your toe into that, but I would never recommend Hyllus diardi or any locale of Hyllus diardi to beginners. So before anything, just take your time to research what species would work best for you. One thing I should say is if the seller can't tell you the breed or the locale, that's a red flag. And that's, I've had a lot of customers say to me, can you identify this species, because I haven't been told. If I don't breed them myself, I'm not to know how old they are, where they've come from, and what species or locale they are. But it does happen a lot, so make sure that your breeder can tell you what species they are, because as I said before, all have different requirements. So in my opinion, it is always best to have the enclosure ready before your spood arrives, always. Some people will order a spider and it come with an empty enclosure and then you're panic buying supplies. Everything should be ready before they come home. One thing that I will always say with enclosures is that you should always have a front opening enclosure, because jumping spiders build their web at the top. And if you have a top opening enclosure, you're just going to damage the web every time you open it, and that will stress them out, it will startle them, it will scare them, they won't feel safe. And they won't feel safe building a hammock if you're constantly pulling up at it. So I always recommend a front opening enclosure. Also recommend having 3 well ventilated walls on the enclosure so that you won't get stagnant air staying in there, there'll be no mold build up or anything like that. You want it to be well ventilated so that the humidity stays at the right percentage for your spider. So to keep the humidity at a good level, we often recommend sphagnum moss, and it's nice because it will really keep that humidity in your enclosure. If it ever gets too high, we take some of that sphagnum moss out and then it should decrease. Also, you want to make sure that you've got the right substrate. So we use Spider Life for the artificial setups. So for the Phidippus regius, for the Phidippus arizonensis, the Phidippus adumbratus, things like that aren't arid species, we will use Spider Life because again it's really good for humidity and keeping it level. So that's one thing we recommend. If you're you've been a keeper for a while and you want to change your species up, or you want to try an intermediate species, we would recommend, what is it called? I think it's habitat bedding, which is what we've used. We've used a lot of different ingredients. I say ingredients, that makes it sound really, really weird, but we use different things in a bioactive setup, and we can do a whole video on that if anybody is interested in how I've set up my Tilistiardi. So one thing that I also sell in my enclosure bundles is cork bark, because that is one of the woods that doesn't mould and it's suitable for arboreal setups. So it's a nice structure that your spider can use to explore, to web up so that they can make a hammock and feel safe, and it doesn't build up that mould that you see on some of those magnetic wood ledges. I always avoid those because within a week you've got mould on them. And as always, we always say this, keep a thermometer, hygrometer at the top of your enclosure as heat travels upwards. So I think it's important to be realistic about temperature and humidity, because your expectations may be one thing and then the reality is something completely different. So jumping spiders, like Phidippus regius, are hardy, but they are not by any means indestructible. And what I mean by that is they require stable conditions. So you don't need to be perfect, but you need to be consistent with that temperature and humidity. Before adopting, ask yourself, is it realistic to be able to maintain those temperatures and those humidities all year round? Am I able to measure the humidity properly? And do I understand how often the species that I have picked will need misting? And I know that these things aren't really difficult, it's more common sense, but they require intention. Like, you need to make sure that you can fulfill that in order for your spider to thrive. So if you don't enjoy having to check things a couple of times a day to make sure that the humidity and the temperature is right, then I would say this isn't for you. So this is one that I touched upon in my last video about ethical breeding, and that is to research your breeder. Because in my opinion, where your spider comes from matters. It really, really does. So myself as a breeder, I will never try and rush a sale. I will always make sure that I welcome any questions, and I always ask if they have any questions. If they're trying to rush a sale, I don't really need to say anything. As I said before, good breeders often welcome and like questions, because I can never shut up about jumping spiders. So if anybody has a question for me in the process of adopting a jumping spider, I love it, because we share a common interest, and that's really, really fun. So I think it's important to go over questions that you can ask your breeder, because not only does it show interest, but it shows that you're willing to take the steps needed to look after the spider that you are purchasing. And a respectable breeder will love that. I love it when customers ask me questions, so I know that any reputable breeder will be happy to answer those questions. So here's some of the ones that I ask when I adopt spiders, and I've actually got the list right here. So if you see me looking down, it's because I've made a list. So I often ask what species it is, although if I'm purchasing from them and I've seen pictures, I will probably already know because they would have put it in the description. Is it captive bred? Because I prefer captive bred. Given my last video, I'm not a fan of wild caught at all. What instar they are, because you want to know how many molts that they've had. What are they currently eating, because you want to make sure that you can then buy that food and have it there for when your spider arrives. What temperature and humidity is best to keep your spider at? When did it last molt? Because if you want to keep track of the molts, that's a question that you're going to want to ask. And do you offer aftercare support? So if you have any other questions, can I come back to you? Because one thing that I always say to customers of mine is that you are always welcome to come back to me with any questions that you have, because I would never want anyone to feel in limbo about this process, because it can be scary first starting this. So it's important that you feel safe with the breeder that you choose. If somebody gets, this is another thing, if somebody gets defensive about basic care questions, to me that's another red flag. They should always be willing to answer any questions you have, because it shouldn't just be about making money in this hobby. Yes, making money is nice, but it should also be about intention and about care. So I think one of the biggest questions to ask yourself when you're dipping your toe in, before making any decisions, is asking yourself, is a jumping spider right for you? This is a part that people sometimes will just skip because people assume that jumping spiders are for everyone, and they're not. They are honestly incredible. They are absolutely incredible to keep. They're so fun to watch. Say I'm sat at my desk and I've got quite a few of them. I love watching them. I really, really do. I never have a dull moment in this spider room. It's always so, so fun. But to me, they're not decoration. They are living animals with beautiful personalities, but short lifespans. They also may not always want to interact with you. I know I've been very, very lucky in the spiders that I have, but some of them just won't want to interact, and you might end up with a spider like that, and you have to be willing to care for it even if it's not what you expected. And the biggest thing that I always say is that sometimes owning a jumping spider can be upsetting because things can go wrong, and it doesn't mean that you failed. For instance, I've had a few that have had internal mismolts, and I always took it quite personally because I always thought, is it something that I've done? But sometimes it's just a weird freak of nature, and it just happens sometimes, and it's really important to prepare yourself for potential losses early on, because that can happen in this hobby. So we haven't actually had a spider join us yet, so I'm going to get out a spider because I completely forgot that you're going to want to see a spider in the video. I've decided today to grab Mocha, our Phidippus regius Bahamas. She is our whitest. Like, I don't know if you can see on the camera, but she is very white. She is our whitest Bahamas, and she is incredible, and she is just a beauty. Also, she's being really well behaved, which again is really great. I've been so lucky. Hi. Oh, she's so beautiful. I just realised I'm talking to her without showing her, but we're going to talk about why preparation matters, because preparation really does matter, doesn't it? She's so cute. So I think that most people who experience who have bad experiences or issues with jumping spiders. I'm getting so distracted. So issues that people experience with jumping spiders don't necessarily come from bad intentions, in my opinion. They often come from impulse buying or rushing the process entirely. I keep forgetting the monitor's over there and I'm looking over here. So in my opinion, preparation doesn't mean perfection at all. I feel like I should have her on this side, but I don't want to like move her to my other arm because I feel like she's going to panic. But oh, she's just sat there. She's usually one to run, but she hasn't today. So what we want is for people to give their spider the best possible start, and that's why preparation is so, so important, isn't it? Adorable. When you're preparing properly, you're not just improving their welfare, you're improving your own experience and you're giving them the best possible start, and that's what's really, really important. No. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're thinking of adopting a jumping spider, it's completely okay to take your time, because it took me 2.5 years to plunge it into this hobby, and I have never looked back. So just research, ask questions. I think the ask questions is the most important part. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It will help you have a better experience. Also, if you ever feel unsure, that's completely okay. We all have to start somewhere, and I was so nervous and unsure when I first started, and now here we are. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.